So as we start, and we have sort of taken the initial step, I just welcome us all into a little bit of safe space. So if you feel like closing your eyes, please feel free to do so. If you feel like leaving them open, I just want us to become present with our bodies as we begin our little adventure, our little journey, our little exploration. And as you draw this inhale, I hope that you can feel the seat of your body where you're in contact with gravity. I hope that you can feel the weight of your legs as they communicate with gravity, whether folded or straight or lying down. And I'd love for you to just relax your facial muscles and just draw in a deep breath and exhale a soft sigh of release. And then there's this one gentle meditation, or rather meditation cue that I really enjoy. When I taught for 15 years yoga classes in New York City, I would say often to my students, like, I'd love for you to just let the pupils of your eyes travel to the back of your head and just allow them to sink a little bit deeper into their sockets. And then just breathe there and feeling into the boundary of your skin, the parameters of your being as they flirt and connect and touch the outer world and are in communication with the world that you inhabit. And then if very gently you could just bring your attention to your back, the back of your heart, whatever it is leaning against and pressing against. Vulnerability is a Latin word, comes from a Latin word, vulnus. It means many things, but the one that struck out the most is wounding and defenselessness. Quite simply, vulnerability is feeling a sense of exposure, feeling exposed, feeling of being revealed in a sense when you were not prepared or were planning to reveal your inner self, feeling exposed or in some cases found out. And a very tender place that hurts often. Emotion, it's found in the emotional landscape. And from the emotional landscape, it finds a way into the body, as everything does. So often people will relate vulnerability to being a feeling of an abyss in the pit of the stomach, a sense of fear in one's throat, a gripping or a hollowing in the chest. It takes on different patterns of communication with us. And we've all felt it, we all know it, we're all familiar with it. And in this moment, if we could take a deep inhale, and part of what I love about our school, our community, is that we can go to the places that we were not taught to go to in school and in our upbringing and in most of the outer world when we interact with it. As you breathe into your body, feel the earth of your being as your hips land fully and completely onto your seat. We all know vulnerability, a feeling that has visited us from time to time. And maybe we could do just like a little gentle scan with our inward gaze of the body and just become aware of the areas, the places where vulnerability likes to reside. And it could be something that makes itself evident pretty clearly because we recently experienced something that made us feel vulnerable, or maybe it takes us a minute to locate it in the body. And maybe it's amorphous and it's not clear, but if you become aware of it somewhere on your body map, we'll just breathe into it. And the interesting thing about vulnerability is that when we start to find its address in our bodies, it shows up with other guests as well. So fear, terror, they all hang out together. And as we all inhabit fully this breath that we draw into the lungs, into the belly, we feel and recognize vulnerability and the other emotions that make themselves present. And the idea is to feel into its texture and the space that it occupies in the body. Because every hurt, every heartbreak, every rejection can leave us feeling vulnerable, attacked, defenseless, exposed. And with every such event, we have learned to cultivate a piece of armor to cover the hurt. Some of us are adorned in that armor. And why I like to bring attention to the seat in this particular meditation is because feeling into the spaces of your body where you feel vulnerable, it's nice to juxtapose it with the place that you feel steady or feel supported or have a place to rest, and where you're seated and where you're connected to gravity feels like a safe place, knowing that that earth there right below us is holding us despite the fragmentation that we may feel in other parts of the body because of the vulnerability. And then a slow exhale as you just recognize the space and acknowledge this emotion in your body. Right, so since everyone is feeling into that space and nobody's raised a hand yet, Amira. Someone really hits me in my stomach, chest, and legs, so it was very grounding. Yes. Yes. Amira, it's sometimes when we're really out and exposed, it's the only thing we have, the ground beneath our feet. That's as real as reality gets, and that's all we have access to. And it's pretty amazing. It's pretty big. It's pretty huge. And as Lorin often teaches us to just draw from everything in nature that's there for us, to support us, to heal us, to make us feel complete. So really give the weight of your lower body to the gravity that holds and wants to cradle your vulnerability, has the capacity to cradle it.
My heart is always the first place I feel vulnerable. And I've learned to value that. I am working to feel into my vulnerability in my life, because I equate vulnerability with authenticity. That when I am at my most vulnerable, I am truly being myself, without the programming and without the armoring. And so that's why I value it so much.
A lot of us, the heart is that incredible organ, right? It's the first one that takes a blow. When you feel into that space as you're present with it right now, is there ever a need in that moment to want to protect it immediately in this moment, or is it more of a I'm just feeling the landscape right now of where it is?
In this moment, no, because I feel safe here. If I'm out in the world and something triggers that beautiful unfolding, yes, I do. There is a part of me that is always vigilant for possible, I don't know, danger,
Wounding.
that there's a part of me that's always vigilant for that when I'm outside in the world. But in this space, in this group, with these people, I don't know if I feel any need to defend that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Like Matt, I felt it in my heart, and I still have a little bit of a heartache. And as soon as I felt it, I questioned why heart? And then I said, there is a space in the heart where everything meets, so why not? Yeah, that is my experience. And here I feel safe. I do feel safe here.
I realized that it was so incredible to just sit with the vast emptiness of feeling vulnerable, the ghostly unknowingness of what this emotion is and what it's bringing, and how I feel quite ill-equipped to deal with what should I do when I feel this vulnerable. In that moment, I also started realizing that I don't need to start finding solutions, and I went into the why as well, like, well, why am I feeling this? But then I would tell myself, well, maybe I don't have the solution and I don't need to find the solution in this moment. I realized that not feeling like you belong somewhere also often leaves you feeling vulnerable. And as I explored that further, I found that vulnerability has a lot to do with sense of belonging, that we all have at different times felt like the outsider. And sometimes it's a continuous feeling for a long time. So my life was not going to change, and I was going to continue being this way, and I was not going to settle. So I had to learn to live with this feeling of feeling exposed and not really knowing my way, not just physically, but also emotionally, not knowing my way in foreign lands all the time, starting from scratch every 3 months. And then as I went deeper into the exploration and meditated with this sinking feeling in my heart, this diving into the hollowness inside my chest, because that's how vulnerability showed up for me in my body, I was purged into another emotion from that diving in. And that was an emotion that was interesting. I wasn't quite familiar with it, so I tried to name it. So it's like, all right, well, what is this coming up? And it's so funny and bizarre, but the word that I wrote in my journal was shameless. Shameless. And so I was like, oh, so if I sit with this feeling of this hollow emptiness in my heart and feeling broken, and say I'm okay with it and I acknowledge it and I can be with this, what's coming up for me is shamelessness, like I'm feeling shameless somehow. And then I Googled the relationship between vulnerability and shame. And there's a plethora of information out there. So these dots were starting to connect in my own, as my psychology professor from college says, that's your me search. There's research and there's me search. Right. So if we can, and I want to take us into another reflection. So if we can for a moment, feel into that part of yourself that feels exposed, that feels that your innermost core has been exposed in a place where maybe it wasn't safe, your supple inner core. Can we at least be with that feeling and acknowledge it? I realized in this journey that it was a process to get to the place of honesty with myself, to arrive at the station of shamelessness, saying, oh, well, I'm just hanging out with this feeling and it's just shameless to be here, but this is what it is. And so we're going to hang out here for a bit. And where is the shame? And that's an inquiry for us to make for a few moments, if we can take that time and ask ourselves, where is the shame in the vulnerability that I feel, that I mapped in my body? What is its connection? What is the relationship that the two of them have? And I would just also ask that when we go into these places, that we please practice a lot of love and tenderness and gentleness with ourselves. Because it also takes a lot for our supple inner core to feel brave enough to let itself be known, even to ourselves. And if with tremendous care and love, as if you were going towards a wounded baby, almost as if you would lift that feeling and bring it, that hurt, that brokenness, that inadequacy, the shame that goes with that brokenness, and hold it to your heart as if you were soothing a crying, wounded child. And breathe into it. Sending it, feeling love for it, in spite of the shame we have been conditioned to feel. As you breathe into it, I'm just going to read to you a little poem or musing that I posted in our network that came to me as I was in this meditation. And I wrote, can we talk about the things that hurt? Can we talk about the things that hurt? The ones that hurt quietly and constantly, like a silent presence, shifting its unsure feet behind the canvas smile. The immovable, that presence, in all its realness and rawness, its fragile fractures across the wrinkled tapestry of those bare, naked moments in life. Can we stand inside this relentless orbit? Can we listen to its unbothered hum? Where can I begin to let go? Which part of me shall I allow to come apart now? Where can my febrile fingers let go of the desperate clutch around phantom fears? Could I let myself breathe a little inside the canyon of my spirit's void? I've been visiting this place judiciously, gingerly, because the needful must be done. We must go to places that posit sufficient challenge. Why else but to break apart often, to let the hard shell fissure and the soft core breathe beneath. You could just allow your next exhale to be longer, a little bit longer. Just emptying out some of the weight of the armor that we carry.
You know, that it takes courage to be vulnerable. And, you know, perhaps those of us here, you know, as thought leaders to some extent, although that if we can continue to help ourselves be vulnerable, to have the courage to do it with others, that maybe that's where we find our connection with others. That this all feels like we're being, pushed through a meat grinder to some extent, but we come out as something more whole on the other side.
It was feeling vulnerable and then going into that vulnerability where I suddenly start to recognize, oh, shame lingers around here. And I think they're in a loop with each other.
And shame comes from conditioning. It's like the shame is one side of the coin and the vulnerability is the other.
Somehow they're quite intricate, it feels. Yeah. And I think it might be interesting. It could be that in each one of us, there's a different relationship. I believe these components exist, but what comes first and what is the relationship of one with the other? But shame is most definitely, it's all conditioning. It's society, it's culture, for sure. I think.
One of our foundational teachings here is to welcome everything and welcome all parts of ourselves. And I co-teach this class called Fields of Belonging, and we start with belonging to ourselves. That's where we start. And it's profound, this idea that we have this connectedness, this sense of belonging, this instinctual sense of belonging to ourselves. And there's lots of people who don't have that experience. And, I think for most of us, it's conditional. There are parts of us that we accept and we feel total belonging with. And there's parts of us that we don't accept or maybe not even know about. They're out of consciousness. Not belonging is a kind of a self-belief, a self-narrative. I don't belong here. I've been rejected. I've been shamed. I just can't connect with people, and that's a weakness of mine. And breaking that narrative is a huge task for all of us. And the first step in breaking that narrative is to recognize it and accept it and to be vulnerable to it. And that's where shame comes in, right? Shame is underneath all of those, under that narrative in so many different ways. And so I'm so glad that you brought that word up today. Really, really good. Really, thank you, because it's another, so in that last meditation, I went down into the lower dantian, down into the sacral area, and that's my next frontier, is going to the shame that is there, the deep held shame, and at least acknowledging it and starting to feel it. I can't welcome it yet, but I can acknowledge it and feel it. And that's the first step. So thank you for letting me say all that.
Thank you so much for saying all that. And even as I was preparing for this session, we're not looking for cure. This is not a disease, vulnerability. And we kind of live in this world where everybody's always trying to fix everything, and everything in the universe is perfect in its beauty and completeness or imperfection, however we see it, but it is perfect in the way that it is. And we're here on this planet in these incredible bodies that from time to time function just right. And sometimes we struggle for them to function just right, but we're in these bodies to experience it all. And somehow, as Lori said earlier, and you also said, Matt, but the shame piece is schooled into us. We're schooled to learn where to be shameful of our feelings, our desires, our emotions, our actions. And sometimes maybe the greatest task is to even just tenderly just knock on the door and maybe just open it a little bit and say, whoa, I'm going to breathe and be with this room called shame inside me, you know? And then when I stayed with that, I realized when I entered that room called shame, that somehow appeared as shameless at first, or maybe when I stuck around with it long enough, it just felt kind of shameless. It led me to feeling this insane wilderness. Like I felt, oh my God, this is the boldest thing I can do in my life, to just be here and to say, wow, I just kind of don't really know, and it's fine. And I'm at a loss, and it's okay. It's not the end of the world. I need not feel ashamed. And it's oddly liberating to say that one doesn't know. But what one must venture to know is at least that place inside us where the brokenness is sitting, where the hurt has been hiding, where the fear and the pain and the terror kind of party together or hang around together. It's good to go visit that place, I feel, and not with the, intention to cure anything, but an intention to get to know those very powerful parts of us that are really, that's the gem, those are the treasures, right? In the ruins. Those are the treasures in the ruins. I recognize that this hiding from my own vulnerability and not accepting and feeling shame around issues is what protects me from diving deeper into relationships, into projects, into explorations, even in intimate communication. We program to protect ourselves because we feel maybe if I expose too much of my soft inner core, someone's gonna, take a shot at it. A life will happen, it will attack me, it will wound me, it will leave me defenseless.
Cares about you. And I think that's such a huge component of vulnerability is you have to be seen. To work through vulnerability, you have to be witnessed. And that's the scariest part. Like that's what it is. And so, but it also opens you up to possibility. Like, so if I was going in thinking this might be something that I want, but having that talk, by being open, it allowed it to kind of move through me. So it was maybe coming from like an ego place. Once it was able to move through that vulnerability, like it kind of opened up and let some things go. And so I thought that was just a really fascinating insight.
That shame comes from the messaging that it's not okay to be ourselves.
Yes.
It's not okay to be that true nature, that true essence of who we are. And that's pretty powerful when you want to belong.
What I love so much about this group is that it allows us the latitude to kind of work our own neuroplasticity, to kind of recreate or to create new highways of thinking in our minds so that we can overcome the conditioning that we've all faced at different points in our lives, and therefore get more increasingly comfortable with sitting in our vulnerability and recognizing that just in spending time, it takes down or it deflates some of that power that it once held over us, in which we felt shame or felt that lack of sense of belonging. And so I'm really encouraged by the fact that there's this, you said a loop, and I think there is both a learning loop and, a chance to to shift how we see shame and vulnerability over time, provided we have safe places in which we can explore and be with it. Yeah, I'm finding this a fascinating conversation. So thank you.
And so the Sufis would say, yeah, that's great. Be vulnerable, know that you live in the world, but remember that discernment is very necessary. Discernment is very essential, knowing who are the people that you can trust and love and open, because your heart and your soul and your growth needs that, needs the people, those people to be able to share that with and open up to. Like, was it Jan that said, we need to be seen. It's a requirement of this human journey. And we sharpen our ability to discern often through the hurt we have experienced. We know what has hurt us and how badly, and who has hurt us and how badly, and who to protect from and how much, and who you can be your complete self, accepting yourself and knowing that they will accept you completely and fully as well. And I will say that I'm personally, it's interesting to go here in this part of my inner map, and it's still scary every time because we don't like to feel pain. We're just not programmed to enjoy it. But then I think about, all the good, the beauty in the world that came from pain also, the artistic beauty in the world. And that sometimes when one sits with those empty evenings all by yourself and gaze at nothingness, it's like, well, this is interesting.
Yeah, so all these aspects of ourselves or myself, the shame, all the things that were mentioned tonight, where we think about, wow, to be able to get to that and to be with that. But that is the bliss, to get there, to be there. Whenever I've been there, it feels like fear, or it feels like shame, or it feels like, and just listening to your story as well as other people's story tonight, I realize how much that is for me, shame. So yeah, I'm really very not comfortable right from the start with being vulnerable and being myself, especially, but to feel it, to get in touch with it, it's almost like the cracks in the armor start cracking. It's in me, there's a lot of physical stagnation, and that starts to open up, and it's just, so nice to feel all these things that I'm not comfortable with the rest of the time. And I really want to work, and this is not the first time I've said this, but I want to work, I want to try to be I want to try to be better at being with that all the time. I know that statement was just loaded with a lot of stuff, but yeah, I want to stay there more. So that's all I have to say.
I almost want to say, it's going to sound strange, but that's a juicy place to be in. To be with that place inside ourselves. There's so much data there. It's such a place we could geek out in, because it's the hurt, the landscape of it, the inadequacy, the weirdo inside us, that element inside has so much incredible experience, information, emotion. And I'm almost prompted to share if any of you, I know everybody here is very creative in their own way, even if they're doing very scientific things in life, but if we are going into this journey together, and I know we only chose this as a one-off session, but it's just occurring to me as we're chatting, a creative outlet that you enjoy, a lot. And Edward, like when you said your body, the chinks in the armor, I almost felt like, oh, maybe the body needs to move and it needs to dance and it needs to somehow needs to be encouraged to let go of the things that have bound it. But I'm wondering if there is something, if we all could revisit this place from time to time, now that we are talking about it in our circle, or maybe we can pick a time and come back together and share an expression of our vulnerability. For me, it comes out in poetry. I mean, I'm not a good poet at all, but I have no other choice. I'm not a good painter, so I'll just try to string some words along. And I'd love to share a couple of things as they come, and I would love to see what comes for you in your exploration of vulnerability. And can we use vulnerability as a channel of creativity? Because I do believe that that's what it was. That's what it has always been for the greatest musicians and artists and creators of the world. It was that great vulnerability that allowed them to expose and create something from the pain.
I love the idea, Tanya, because I think it brings us back around to sharing in our humanity, you know, because it's often in those universal themes of, you know, being vulnerable or being shame, feeling shame, that we can see in others what we feel and see in ourselves. So I think that's why we respond to like the great poets and songwriters and so on, because we can relate so intimately with their encapsulation of the experience. So that would be a really neat way to bring it around.
Yeah, and I feel just that shame piece, you know, it needs some space to breathe. And it probably is a very creative part of us that just feels wrong all the time or on the outside of everything. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be in this circle. I'm always scared to teach. I'm always scared. It's frightening, especially when such intelligent people who've done so much work on themselves show up. But it's just so humbling and such a privilege. So I thank you from the absolute depths of my heart.